Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 1973 Imperial LeBaron. Up front is a 7.2 liter V8, and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now I am super excited to be driving this Imperial LeBaron because this is my first ever Imperial. Imperial was a division of Chrysler that was meant to rival Lincoln and Cadillac, and it did in the 1950s, actually outselling Lincoln in 1957, but then it kind of went downhill, and so this was one of the final actual Imperials built. They did go on for 74 and 75, but then they just rebadged them as New Yorkers and kind of gave up on Imperial as a brand, later using the name for the Chrysler Imperial, but then since the 90s, it's been dormant ever since. And so today, I get to share with you a true, real, iconic Imperial. But if you would like to submit your own vehicle, whether it's here in Denver or across the country, you can do so at zackpradel.com. But let's get back to that 440 under the hood. It is a very big engine that gets about 9 miles to the gallon. It is not a very efficient engine, but it is a rather smooth one. Similarly, the 3-speed TorqueFlite transmission is smooth. However, it doesn't really have too much pep in its step. Last but not least, the Imperial LeBaron is rear-wheel drive, and I do want to talk about something interesting because not many of these exist anymore. They made under 3,000 coupes for 72 and 73, but these cars were really taken out of circulation by Demolition Derby Racing because this actually is the longest non-limousine car sold in America. They have miles in front of the engine and radiator for crashing and bashing in a demo race. And so Demolition Derbies actually ended up banning this car because it was too good, because it was such a tank. The 440s are solid engines, and it has so much crumple room on either end that it was unfair to other contenders. And so unfortunately, there's just not many of these left. But how does it feel to drive the Imperial LeBaron? You feel like a dictator. You feel like the man on the block, and there's no one that could tell you anything ever again. It is very floaty, very boaty, of course, and when you hit a pothole up front, it takes about 2 to 3 business days to hit that pothole at the back, but even when you do, you don't feel it much, and that's a beautiful thing. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I do have a horizontal speedometer. Now, what's interesting is that the numbers are actually printed on the outside of the gauges. Very weird to see, but we also have our fuel gauge, temperature gauge, and things like that. On the steering wheel, we don't get anything too interesting besides the Imperial name, which is interesting in its own regard. And then off to the left, we have our washer, wiper, and light settings. And on the door, we have our power mirrors, locks, and our window switches. Moving into the center, we do have our Auto Temperature 2, the sequel to Auto Temperature, our 8-track player and FM radio. Imperial was one of the first companies to use a transistor radio in cars, which is very cool. And off to the right, we have our fan speed, our chronometer clock, which this was the first car to do that as well, and some climate vents. And down below, we have an alarm system. This was outfitted with a factory alarm system, one of the first cars to do that as well. Off to the very right, we have this really nice LeBaron badge that I absolutely love. I think it looks great. And on the floor, we do have a proper Imperial floor mat, which is very, very hard to find, and I love the logo on there as well. No cup holders found here in the Imperial LeBaron, unfortunately, so predictably, it fails the big friggin' bottle test. Now, the seats are incredibly comfortable. We all knew this was going to be the case, but it just blows my mind every time that seats could even be this comfy. You sink into them, it helps soak up the bumps, and if I had it my way, I would sit in here for the rest of the day. But I have to go to work, so I can't do that, unfortunately. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats, so let's go do a back seat review. All right, so we're in the back of the Imperial LeBaron, and it is very comfy. Is it the most spacious thing in the world? No, but they did make a 4-door version. I imagine that would be a little bit more spacious in the back, but you get this awesome Imperial logo over my right shoulder. I have power window options, dome light options, cigarette lighters. I have plenty of headroom. I have a center console. This is not a bad place to be, even though it is a coupe. Although, like I said, it's one of the largest, longest cars that was ever made, and so they should have at least a little bit of space for the back seat. but here's the back seat of an Imperial LeBaron. However, talking about big spaces, let's hop into the trunk. All right, around the back of the Imperial LeBaron, and this is the era of 2 separate keys. So square key for the ignition, circle key for the trunk. Pop it up like that, and look at the size of that bad boy. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger. Hello. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and as you can tell with this walk around, this is the longest 2-door built. That's not a limo, and oh god, it looks so flippin' cool. I love this darker burgundy color, especially contrasting the white interior. Overall, it's just so regal. This car has so much presence, and you don't really get that much from modern luxury, especially from the Chrysler brand. You don't see that from the Chrysler brand at all anymore. I mean, the 300 was kind of the last of that, but even still, not very good. And of course, we have to mention the fact that this does have garage door headlights, which look so good. So good. But with all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving the Imperial LeBaron from 1973? Well, it's an incredibly cool experience to be driving a brand that isn't around anymore. It always is. It's one of my favorite things to do. I drove an AMC from the same owner this morning, so I'm kind of in that mindset. But I think this is a really interesting look at Chrysler. By the time this Imperial was made, Imperial as a brand was already over the hill. In the 1950s, they had their own assembly lines. They were competing pretty well with the other 2 big luxury brands, and they held their own. They could at least tread water. But as it got into the late 60s and early 70s, there seemed to be less and less interest from the public for the Imperials. Cadillac and Lincoln really had something special going on, and so they made less and less and less of these, to the point where this is one of the final years. And when this was made alongside the Chrysler New Yorker. It was just a slightly extended Chrysler New Yorker. Now, there's a lot of other parts that don't match up properly, but by and large, it's a longer New Yorker. And it was made in the same factory where previous Imperials actually had their own assembly lines. They were more bespoke. But driving this here today, it's still clinging on to that bespoke life. It still says, hey, I'm special, and you are special. The fact that you get to drive me. That's so great. And it's one of the last model years that feeling was offered from Chrysler. Because after this, they worked it back into the Chrysler badge, and the Chrysler Imperials throughout the late 80s and early 90s were great. They even had the Frank Sinatra edition in the 80s. They were cool. They didn't sell well, but you know, they were still interesting. But really, truly, this was them saying, that's it. And they tried to bring it back for 74 and 75. It didn't really work. Sales continued to dip and dip and dip, and there's only so much that a company can take. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Mac for letting me take out his Imperial LeBaron. Absolutely wonderful. I also have to give a huge shout out to the Forney Transportation Museum here in Denver, Colorado. This is one of their display vehicles. Very, very cool that they let me do this. They let me take a tour of the Forney as well. So please, if you're in the Denver area, go check out the Forney Museum of Transportation. They are wonderful, as well as the owner, Mac. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.